Yeah.
Is there ever a scenario where you recommend that maybe the couple files together?
Yeah, I mean, it really a lot of times actually people come to me after they've filed for divorce, after their divorce is finalized, and I think to myself, I wish you came to me before
Mm-hmm.
you did all this because it would have been mutually beneficial.
Okay.
For example, if a couple owns a house and they have a considerable amount of equity, before they file a dissolution, they can claim the homestead, no problem. Okay. Once they sell the house and then they each have the money in their bank accounts, that's where the problem comes in because now they're no longer living in the house. So they can't claim the homestead.
Mm.
Can they claim the homestead on those proceeds? Only if they're going to reinvest those proceeds. So it gets really complicated.
Mm.
But if they would have filed the bankruptcy before they filed for dissolution, they could maybe get rid of their debts together, protect their homestead. But people don't really think it doesn't really come up
Mm-hmm.
until they're in the middle of the divorce and they're like, oh my God, I can't afford anything now.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually what happens. So it's kind of hard to backtrack at that point. But the problem is that if you're in the middle of a divorce and then you want to claim a homestead exemption, a trustee can say, well, who's keeping this property? Who's living in this property? You know,
Mm-hmm. That is so
it,
scary.
yeah. So it is bankruptcy can be really helpful. It can also be really dangerous. It can
Mm-hmm.
really jeopardize assets. So I'm pretty conservative when it comes to filing Chapter Sevens. When there's real estate involved, I'm super conservative because the last thing I want is to file a bankruptcy for someone and have them be, end up in a worse situation,
Right.
which can happen.
Can you discharge child support or spousal support?
No,
Can you discharge
but
attorney fees? Oh, no. I want to hear your but first.
oh, you can discharge equalization payments in a Chapter 13.
Wow. Can you explain what an equalization payment is?
I
Or
think
do
you
you
can
want me
probably
to?
explain that. I think you can explain that better.
So, what happens in a divorce proceeding? One party might be ordered to pay, let's say, $50,000 to the other party to equalize the property and or debt that was um, divided in the divorce proceeding. A lot of times, one party might say, "Hey, I'll take all the debt, um, but I get $30,000 out of the joint savings account." So what Elisa is now telling us is that that equalization payment, 50,000 from party A to party B, can be discharged in a bankruptcy proceeding. Go
But
ahead.
it's a Chapter 13. Chapter 13's means you have a higher income.
Okay.
So it means that your ability to discharge that debt is going to depend again on your assets, your income, and your expenses. It doesn't mean 100% you're going to get all that debt discharged.
Right.
It's just that it's eligible.
So let's say party A was ordered to pay party B's attorney fees. Can those be discharged since it's awarded to someone else?
If it's ordered by the family law court, I would say no.
You don't look confident in that.
Well, it's ordered by the family law court. So even though equalization payments can be discharged, an attorney's fees award, I don't know if it's really come up in my practice.
But your own personal attorney fees to your attorney, you can discharge.
If they're awarded by the family law court,
Not awarded. So let's say I represented someone and they owe me
oh,
$20,000. Can that be discharged?
yeah, if it's not like ordered by the family law court.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Attorney's fees are discharged all the time.
I know. It's happened.
I feel bad. I feel bad when I have to do it, but
Yeah. And I think I've heard from other colleagues that say a client will run up their fees to $50,000, $60,000 and then have them discharged.
yeah, that's not fun.
No, but that is a note to lawyers. You cannot keep high balances in that way unless there is a clear understanding of how the fees are going to be paid.
Well, I think also a way that lawyers can safeguard themselves in family law court, especially, is to have like what is it called, a farple?
Uh huh.
That So like a lien on the
on the lien on the
property.
property. Because that would have to be paid first, right? In the
Not
discharge.
not first, but it's then secured.
Right. So we were getting into, oh, you said spousal support. How about spousal support arrears? Can that be discharged?
No.
So no support can be discharged in a bankruptcy. Okay.
No, and in a Chapter 13, you'd have to be able to catch up on that within 5 years. So if you owe spousal support arrears or child support arrears in a Chapter 13 reorganization or in a Chapter 11, you'd have to be able to pay that over in a payment plan.
Okay. Yeah, because that's just the reorganization. Chapter 7 is the complete dismissal of the debt. Is that correct?
Discharge of the debt. Yeah.
Discharge.
They call it a discharge.
Okay. I'm learning too, see? So this is even sounding really frightening for myself. So are there steps that people can take to protect themselves? Would a prenup help, or would some other contract help in this setting?
Yeah, prenuptial agreements definitely help because then if you're married to someone who has a business and they get into a lot of debt, you know, that debt would be considered, if you have a prenup, you can make that debt separate property, right?
Right.
Or separate debt, I mean. Yeah, prenups are definitely helpful. In the bankruptcy context, it's not 100% foolproof as far as a trustee getting a hold of assets. A trustee is going to look at everything. They're going to, let's say you say, oh, I have a prenup. This is not my property. They're going to want to look at that prenup. They're going to want to, look at where was there commingling.
Right.
Because the commingling would affect, what is community property, what is separate, right?
Right.
So it's important before you get married, and I think we discussed this in the last time I was on, to have a serious conversation about finances. I do have a good number of clients who will file bankruptcy before they get married, which I think is smart because you don't want to go into a marriage with like a bunch of debt and then it's still separate debt, but it affects your budget, and then once you get married, you have to take into account the other spouse's income. So you might not qualify anymore for a bankruptcy, whereas you may have qualified when you were single.
Right. That's a good tip. Is there anything else you recommend? We talked about prenup, potentially filing before you get married. What about protecting yourself once you are married and that other party they're going to go forward? Is there anything that they can do to protect themselves?
Yeah, I mean, so while you're married, if you don't have a prenup, then your bank accounts are technically still community property, right? But let's say if your spouse, like has a business and there's like a lot of tax debts, maybe file taxes separately. That could help. I don't know. I'm not a tax attorney, but I would think that would be helpful. Or let's say your spouse has a lot of debts, have separate bank accounts. So at least if there's judgments against your spouse, they don't levy your bank accounts. That can be, these are just little things you can do. It's not going to, again, change the character of the assets if you don't have a prenup, but at least practically, if American Express has a judgment against your spouse, and they go to levy his bank accounts, if you have your own, they won't be able to levy yours.
What if I'm added as a signor or second on the American Express? If it's in default, can they come after me if I'm just added as a user?
It depends. It depends if you give them your social. Sometimes you think you're an authorized user, but you're really on the hook. It just really depends.
Will a credit card add you without providing your social as an authorized user?
Sometimes.
So it's best not to go on as a user.
If you're giving them your social, then you're definitely probably going to be on the hook.
So that's another strategy. Don't add yourself to credit cards. Same with businesses, right? Because I know sometimes a spouse might come on as a vice president or president of the organization.
Yeah.
Does that put them on the hook just because they signed documents?
Yes.
And that happens a lot when businesses are
Yeah.
formed during the marriage.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's a pro and a con to everything, right? You want to be, let's say, if you think the business is going to be successful, you want to be on it. But then if it's not successful and you're on it, then you're on the hook for, the failure of the business and the fallout.
Right.
So there's always a cost benefit analysis.
Right. So I want you to talk to the person that is considering bankruptcy and they're married. So, kind of what advice would you give them loosely? Because Eliza is not forming any client relationships here. But if someone was wondering, I'm married, I'm thinking about bankruptcy, what would you say to them?
I would say you have to be honest with your lawyer about all assets, including your spouse's assets. You have to tell them everything that's going on. You shouldn't be transferring any assets before you call the lawyer. Sometimes people go transferring things. Oh, yes, I just gave this to my sibling. I gave this to my mom. Well, that just messed everything up. Um, so, yeah, you just have to be careful about what you do, any changes in your finances. So, it's always better to talk to a lawyer before you do anything, before anything changes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so whether you're, and I have a lot of couples that I'll just file for one spouse and they stay married.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't both have to file. Let's say if it's all credit card debts and just one, it's under one spouse's name, the other spouse doesn't have to file.
What would you say to the couple that is considering filing for bankruptcy and then filing for divorce?
I would say that a lot of times I know that I would say family law is a pretty zero sum place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the other person gets is to the detriment of whatever one party gets is to the detriment of the other party. But in bankruptcy, it's not necessarily that way. So I would say that if you're a couple considering divorce before you even file divorce, talk to a lawyer because it could be beneficial for both of you to file the bankruptcy before you even file the divorce.
Hmm. Yeah, and it makes it a lot easier for us divorce attorneys because we have no debts to consider
Exactly.
in the
Exactly.
divorce.
And then you have more generally, if there's real estate involved, you're going to be better off filing before a dissolution is filed.
Right, because of the
Because then,
homestead.
yes,
Hmm. And I don't think a lot of people think about that. They think about, I want to be in a better position when the divorce is final. I don't really care what happens to my spouse.
but it can help both parties because then there's less debt to allocate, right?
Right, right.
And then you have more disposable income going forward.
What do you say to the party now? They went through the divorce, they have all this debt, they were assigned the debt. What do you say to that person?
They're stuck with that.
Mm-hmm.
They can't get rid of it because the family law court ordered them to pay that.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. So if you're ordered to pay debt, you can't discharge it?
No, unless it's considered an equalization payment.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a distinction between ordering to pay the debt and an equalization payment?
Well, sometimes debt is awarded to one party, right? So let's say we
Okay.
do our final orders. So one party will have the Visa, American Express, and MasterCard.
Mm-hmm.
They are assigned that debt.
Okay. So let's say if they're assigned the debt that's under their name already,
Mm-hmm.
then they're fine. They can
Okay.
just, if it doesn't affect the other spouse. But let's say if they're assigned the other spouse's debt,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you have to pay, you know, if you're John and you have to pay your ex Jane's debt,
Mm-hmm.
if it's not an equalization payment, then she can go back into family law court if you don't pay it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. And I guess the same is true is if I am the debt holder, but my spouse is an authorized user, but the debt is assigned to the primary party. Am I
Mm-hmm.
still protected as the spouse that was added as the authorized loser? Not
So
loser, user.
it just depends. Again, you have to pull your credit report, see if it's showing up on your credit report. Sometimes it does, I don't know.
Has there ever been a situation where a creditor does go after the spouse? And what are some of those circumstances?
That tends to be in the case where the creditor is a personal creditor. It's an personal. It gets personal, right?
Right.
So let's say the husband has a business, and the creditor knows the husband is married, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
knows the wife. So then in those situations, I see them going after the spouse.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, if you're dealing with American Express or Bank of America, they don't know who's married. They don't
Right.
know your life story, you know? But I've seen it. So it's not that it's impossible, it's just
Mm-hmm.
that it's not likely unless it's a personal situation.
Mm-hmm. This is all very enlightening. And I've talked to you before, and we've had outside conversations. But I want to say this is a very, very important topic. And I think anyone going through a divorce or thinking about bankruptcy and then a divorce, it's important to talk to both a bankruptcy attorney and a divorce attorney so you know kind of how to navigate that before you make irrational decisions that can come and bite you in the behind a little later.
Yeah, and it's good for your lawyers to actually coordinate. So if you
Yes.
hire, like if someone hires you, Demetria, and they want to go for the family law, the dissolution, they should, connect with me and have me connect with you
Mm-hmm.
so we coordinate. I always coordinate with my clients' other lawyers.
Right.
Like if my clients have a PI case pending, I say, okay, I need to talk to your PI lawyer. We can't
Right.
just file this case without talking to them
Right.
because it can really mess up that case.
Hmm.
So I'm all about communicating with everyone involved to
Right.
make sure that the timing is right.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you taking your time today to come and explain bankruptcy to all of us and how it impacts family law. I think people need to know that, especially where we are in our society when people are really considering what to do with their debt and how to kind of get out of this COVID mess, as I call it. So I really,
Yeah.
really, really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And for our guests at Legally Uncensored, thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to go follow us on all social media platforms. Don't forget we are on YouTube, and you can find anything you need about Legally Uncensored at legallyuncensored.com. Thank you.